Hello, and welcome back to the Baby Teeth podcast, where we talk about the form of the formless, where we sit down to take a look at our shared humanity together. And here with me, Xander, today is the one and only Matthew Pav. And I don't know how to pronounce her last name.
Oh, it's Rumpelstiltskins. Matthew Curvorst.
It's not a... Oh. My brain was way off. My brain was going with this. So Rose.
So, yeah, always soft. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Pav's easiest.
So Pav right now is zooming in from Hanuman, Maui. He served as one of Ram Dass's caretakers and is a pillar of the local community from what I hear. He is one of the members of the band Kripa, along with being a part of our sacred community family. He's also just an amazing person, works for the Love Serve Remember Foundation every once in a while. So that's how we get to connect most often. So I'm glad to kind of be here with you in this other kind of context.
Yeah, we get to share a lot of different hats together. Love Serve, SCP, all kinds of things. And soon to be Hanuman Maui, I hope.
Oh man, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
What was your kind of entry point to the practice?
There are all kinds of start points, but the one that I usually pick is first became interested in psychology. That is kind of the closest thing that I was exposed to in my upbringing that began to address the human experience, that thing that we found so interesting but didn't have any context for growing up. And so psychology kind of it was moving in that direction. So I remember when I found psychology in high school, became really interested and continued to study that in college. And just through that exploration, I started reading about meditation. I was so interested in neuroscience and everything like that, and how impactful meditation could be. So I started to get at meditation from a pretty empirical framework and academic framework. It wasn't particularly experiential at the time. It was just like an interesting topic to me. And simultaneously, I was also experimenting with psychedelics. And so there's one trip in particular that was quite the catalyst for me. And that was a mushroom trip when I was, I think I was 18 or so. And it was pretty classic. It was like me and my best friend, and we each had an eighth of an ounce of these mushrooms. We're like, man, let's take these mushrooms and go out at sunrise into the woods and have like a religious experience. Like all young and naive and shit. So we did that, exactly that. And I take the mushrooms and I'm coming up, and it was amazing. And I was studying a lot of chemistry at the time. So my, setting, my framework, the lens that I was kind of perceiving through was this molecular lens. And so I'm seeing all the trees as these beautiful structures of carbons and hydrogens and oxygens, and they're reaching up to the sun, and those trees, all those structures go into the ground, and those were all those same carbons and hydrogens and oxygens. And I look down at my feet, and those are all those same carbons and hydrogens and oxygens. And I'm seeing that it's all kind of like the same stuff through these goggles. And then the question came, what is I?
Hmm.
Seeing that all of this stuff was the same stuff. What is I?
Hmm.
This skin encapsulated ego. I didn't even have the framework of an ego at that point. So that question came. And the only way I could describe it was like there was this cardboard cutout of the letter I, and then it just fell over. That question absolutely blew apart that self-identification. And because I didn't have any framework to land for that question to land, it just became a trip, where that question was like, really, because the answer that I had was no longer sufficient. And I was trying to answer that question to myself. Well, I'm a group of cells. I was born. I'm going to die. I'm a living organism. Like trying to answer that question in all the terms that I had, and none of them did it. And so that was such an interesting experience. And then coming back the next day after coming down from the trip, and going on Google and searching mushrooms, no I, trying to figure out, what the hell this experience was. And then I read, okay, that's an ego death. All right, interesting. What's the ego like that? And so really there was like no framework to conceptualize or hold this experience at all. And so it was the process of integrating and assimilating that, and just going down the rabbit hole of figuring out, okay, ego death, interesting. What's that all about? Is when I first really encountered Buddhism. And that was such a radical moment in my life. First, when I encountered it, I was like, all right, this Buddha guy, he knows what's up. This guy gets it. Cause I just had this experience, where, my own experiential reality confirmed that basic tenet that the self, as we knew it, the self that who we think we are, was an illusion. Not that it was wrong or anything, just an illusion. And I had a clear experience of that in this psychedelic trip. So there was trust from that, having had that understanding rooted in experience, albeit acute experience. There was trust there. And something else so radical about that first discovery of Buddhism was the Four Noble Truths. I had, as I mentioned, I was very much in this paradigm of psychology at the time, where there was normal and there was abnormal, right? And you always wanted to be the normal, right? And because if you were abnormal, you were sick or you were wrong, or, that whole paradigm. And I also grew up in a culture where everything was always okay. You could be having the worst day of your life. Like, hey, how you doing? I'm good. Yeah, great. Okay. So it was like this really stuffy paradigm that I grew up in. And so hearing the first noble truth of Buddhism, the existence of suffering, and that is a ubiquitous experience of the human experience, was such a breath of fresh air. My shoulders dropped for the first time in my life. It's like, oh, wow. And it was an acknowledgement of suffering that had always been kind of taboo in the culture that I was raised in. But that was absolutely liberating to accept in myself that I suffered, and that wasn't, that I wasn't like sick or wrong or anything like that, but that it was a fact of this experience. And so that initial experience, and then that, the opportunity that understanding began to awaken in me, I became really invigorated by it, and dove into Buddhism big time. Academically at first, it was really just books and conceptual understanding. And like my next semester at college, I signed up for an intro to Buddhism class, and at that time I was trying to meditate and stuff, good meditator, 20 minutes a day kind of thing. And in that class, I was introduced to Thich Nhat Hanh, his works and the Miracle of Mindfulness. And I was like, oh man, this is it. This guy's alive. Like there's like a Buddha alive. And I just so resonated with all of his writings. So when I was 20, I went to Plum Village for the summer open retreat, which is a 1 month stay at Plum Village. And that experience absolutely changed my life. Just arriving at Plum Village, which is this incredible monastery in the south of France. You kind of get there. It was my first solo trip too. I went from Paris down to Bordeaux, and then you go out kind of into the middle of the south of France. And these monks pick you up. And I remember just feeling so surreal, because it was so far from, white suburbia that I had grown up in. And we got to the monastery, and I just remember the palpable and radical feeling of being home, and a home unlike any home I had experienced before, where it was okay to be where you were. There wasn't a going quality to the experience. And I remember the first time seeing Thich Nhat Hanh, Thai. We were all in the big meditation hall, and this little man walked in. And it was like time stopped. This man walked so gently. It was like the whole earth shook. He was walking so gently. And once again, another experience I just had no framework to hold. And so, my initial reaction was like, wow, this is like an alien. I had just never seen like out of this world. I had never seen a being like that. Just, it was so foreign to me. And just witnessing that, and just the osmosis of being around a person and a community like that was so radical. And that experience was the first instance of bringing this conceptual understanding that I had developed through books and through classes, and into the experiential. Bringing it into the body, into the present moment. And that changed the trajectory of my life. I knew that this thing that I thought was true, and that there was real possibility and opportunity to transform how we exist in the world, and by virtue of that, the world. Yeah, so Buddhism is how I got into the path.
And then if we kind of fast forward to today, how would you describe your practice?
It's definitely, it's changed over the years a lot. Early on, I was identified as a Buddhist, right? So I can tell you the 4 these and the 8 that's and the 12 these and all of that, because it's like all clean. And yeah, it worked for me at the time. And then that shifted as I ended up traveling to India, and that really began to do its work on me, and on how I navigated the world and related to the world. And then after that, discovered RD. So since that shift, the most consistent practice in my life has been the Hanuman Chalisa. Even more so than meditation. I love sitting. I find it very valuable. But I don't sit every day. What I do every day is I'll sing the Hanuman Chalisa. And yeah, that's the most consistent practice for me in my life. And we also sit here, and puja has become part of my practice since we built the mandir here. But at my core, I think the Hanuman Chalisa has been the most consistent practice for me.
And kind of just to fill in maybe any blanks in case somebody isn't familiar with the Hanuman Chalisa, could you maybe just talk about, if you can, because I'm in a similar boat, at least once a day I will sing through it myself. So I know what I'm about to ask may be asking to describe in the impossible, but could you maybe just talk to what kind of space it opens up just by going through it?
Sure. My relationship to the Chalisa has been in process, as with all practice and life. But one consistent place that it's held in my life is that it's a door in. And what do I mean by in? I mean into myself, into the practice, into the tradition, into the reality that my heart knows is true, that sometimes my mind forgets. So that whole, love, serve, remember thing, it's really a big part of the remember for me. And it's also the love and the serve, because that's what you're asking for. That is what you were praising and singing about in the Chalisa. Chalisa being these 40 verses to Hanuman, to the monkey lord. And it's been a process because at first it started just listening to it. I first encountered it first time I met Raghu. I had funny circumstances. I had just had a nasty breakup in a relationship, and I had to get out of Pittsburgh, and my dear friend Ganesh and Mangala had just moved to Asheville, North Carolina. So I was going to go see them in Asheville, North Carolina. So I go down, and from listening to the podcasts, I had heard that Raghu lived in Asheville, North Carolina. So I get down there and I email him hey, big fan of the Ram Dass podcasts. They've really been impactful for me and changed my life. Can I take you to tea and say thank you? And he said, come over tomorrow, 10 a.m. And so I'm like, oh, wow, cool. And I go over to Raghu's, And we're doing this thing, singing the Hanuman Chalisa 11 times. It's me and Raghu and a few other guys. And that was probably the first time I had ever experienced, definitely the first time I had ever sung the Chalisa in person. And at first, like, you just know the JJJ part, and you get real stoked and clap for that part. Just like this super long prayer. And there's no real context for it, but it definitely has a feeling. And the sound of it, has a feeling in the body that doesn't take much conceptual understanding beyond that at first. And so met Raghu, and which was amazing, because oh wow, this is real too. Like this guy met Neem Karoli Baba. Holy shit! And I'm at his house singing this prayer. It's amazing. And so we sing the 11 Chalisas, and I'm leaving, and he gives me the mala and the photo of Maharaji and all that. I feel all blessed up. And so from that experience, I started to really endeavor into the Chalisa. And I remember just searching for it on Spotify or something. And the first one that came up, I think, was the Gates of Sweet Nectar, the Krishna Das one, the Calling Out to Holy Spirit, which is beautiful, beautiful chant. Don't get me wrong. It wasn't my cup of tea at the time. And then I found Bhagavan Das's Chalisa from the Golden Voice, and that one did it for me. And so I listened to that all the time. I mean, every time I was in the car. It was just the thing, and it was such a vibe, and just getting worked on by that. And so the initial dance with the Chalisa was just listening to it and soaking up the feeling of it. There was no learning. There was no conceptualization going on. It was really just soaking that feeling. And, because of my associations, I associated it with Neem Karoli Baba and with Hanuman and Ram Dass and, the whole scene, the whole tradition. But the feeling that it gave was the thing. That's where it lived, It wasn't my ideas of Neem Karoli Baba. It was, the feeling that came in that chant. And then before that even was Krishna Das's Baba Hanuman from Breath of the Heart. That was, before I even really, before I really knew about Neem Karoli Baba so much, before I knew about Hanuman, I just knew the feeling that song gave me, which I have come to know as, bhav, as the mood of devotion that opens this door to the heart. And so just soaking up these chants and accessing the feeling, accessing the mood, accessing the felt experience of these practices was really the starting point for me. And then ended up, that relationship just develops and grows and continues. And, you end up learning it yourself and singing it. It's still a practice. I'm still learning the meaning line by line, working on my pronunciation and all of that. But what is primary is the felt experience, the devotional mood. Yeah. And also I think it's low-key kind of magic and does stuff to life,
Low-key.
It's really yeah. Yeah, my let's just say my life radically changed once I started singing the Hanuman Chalisa. I ended up moving to Asheville and becoming good friends with Raghu, and then that led me here to be with Ram Dass, and it's changed the trajectory of my life and in my heart. And yeah, it's an interesting thing. If I were to like get all heady and like conceptualize what's up with that, um, I think there's like a certain alignment that goes on, and in that attunement to those vibrations, to that prayer, that like a pitchfork, like a resonating fork, you begin to gravitate towards those frequencies, towards that co-resonance, to the point where my outer life is in resonance with that feeling that I talked about. And so it has a really interesting way of doing that.
Mm, mm, mm. There's something so special about kirtan that I feel more and more unfolding with every passing experience. Just every aspect of being in community together, it being sort of planned, but also sort of spontaneous. Everybody being able to contribute their own sound into the collective sound, which then re-resonates with everybody. It's just such a beautiful expression of just life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Amen. Like, what a way to do the whole life thing, singing and being together, as good as it gets. Like really, like when I ask myself, like, what's just like the stuff of life that I would really love? It's music and being together, and it's a celebration.
Mm.
And yeah, kirtan is so many things. For me, that the being together and that co-resonance quality is such a gift and such an antidote and a powerful medicine for just the malaise of our culture and our world. And it's a lot more accessible for people than meditation in some ways, not for all. But the music that makes, the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down, the music is such a treat, and such like a warm and attractive way to access practice. Yeah, kirtan also like a process. Once you start leading it, or even in response, ego loves to jump in, like with all practice. I remember like when I started responding, just like being so loud and shit. Yeah. And letting it, actually be practice, where the ego is going to come, and there's, the practice is where the rubber hits the road, and that reconciliation happens, and the integration of these patterns, these habit patterns that we develop in our life, and how those integrate and assimilate into this practice of the heart, and how maybe they're softened by that practice. So ongoing process. Absolutely. But what a pleasant practice.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, there are so many, I feel like, more torturous options that people just naturally gravitate towards, to that the fact that like I'm at kirtan now is just such a blessing to kind of stumble into it. Yeah, Sita Ram Das, one of the first things we had talked about in regards to kirtan was, even though it was like on a very small scale, he was like, like even when I'm up there leading, like it's still practice, like it's all practice. There's not necessarily a like, okay, like right now we're performing and not practicing. Like it's just practice. It's even the performance. It's all just in the mind. It's very interesting. I'm kind of going to touch on two different things you mentioned and ask to go towards their synthesis. We've talked about a little bit this culture that just is kind of what a lot of us are coming out of in the United States, of a very heavily Christian influenced background. Even so far, I would say that like the culture now just is Christian. Like there's so many aspects that are just a part of the culture that do have Christian roots that we don't even notice. But the specific part I want to touch on and explore together is, a lot of the rhetoric that puts other people down, even puts people's own self down, can come from like this sort of distorted place of devotion. And devotion is such an integral part of the bhakti practice. It's kind of like the whole thing behind it. So I'm just sort of curious, just kind of throwing it out there. I don't really have a specific question, but just kind of throwing that context.
Exploring.
Yeah.
I agree with like the context of our culture. And I personally, like, I love Jesus and the whole Christ paradigm. It's something that's really dear to my heart and ancestrally part of my lineage. But I think what you were talking about, just the cultural Christianity that we were raised in, which has so much more to do with, the old guy with the beard in the sky, who is the judge.
Watching down with a finger.
Totally. Yeah, totally. How we, kind of the cultural Christianity that a lot of us grew up with was this divination of the judge, right? And God as judge, being the paradigm. And that comes with all of the sin and heaven or hell, all the duality and shame that arises from that paradigm, which is so violent. So violent to ourselves, because mostly that, it definitely has its outer expression, but so much of that paradigm is internalized in how we relate to ourselves and our thoughts and our actions and desires and everything like that. That we have, that stuff that we internalize, that's as Stephen Levine says, the healing we take birth for is to reconcile this paradigm. And that's why bhakti is such a powerful medicine and antidote to this predicament that we find ourselves in culturally, because it's a shift from God as judge to the divine as lover. Like what if God just loves you? And it's like this two-way thing that is so different from the God as judge that we internalize, intentionally or not. Like I was raised in the Lutheran tradition, and I was, my church was sweet, and there was never explicitly any of like the God as judge stuff. And so I think it's just this cultural osmosis, like you said. It's such like it's so rooted in our culture that we pick it up inevitably. And yeah, healing that for ourselves, healing that for future generations, healing that for our ancestors, for our past generations. Such an important process for us to undergo as a culture, individually, all of that in groups. And yeah, like I love Jesus, and I love, the words of Jesus, and he was so subversive to the whole, the system. He was not into the church. He was not into any of that. Greater than the temple is here. He talked about satsang and table fellowship, and the golden rule. So yeah, I also have to shout out Jesus. It's just such a dear archetype for me. But yeah, this the cultural shift from God as judge to God as lover, or we don't even need to use the word God, but just this internal identification paradigm that we carry, moving from judge to lover, is a radical shift. And so many ways to get there. We happen to be using the tools of bhakti yoga and the devotional yoga to access that.
Infinite paths up the mountain.
For sure.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You kind of touched on the note of shame, and I just read yesterday from the book Disappearance of the Universe. It
rings a bell.
It's from the Course in Miracles. I don't know the specific author
cool. Yeah.
off the top of my head.
I'm with you.
But the shame inevitably includes punishment.
Mm-hmm.
Like that I feel like helped me take a big stake out, because even if it's about the smallest thing, even if it's I'm shaming myself about not doing the dishes immediately after I'm done eating. I'm in my head saying, I should be punished for this for whatever reason, even though it's not a problem to my roommates. It's not a problem to the sink or the dishes or the food. I'm going to get to it soon enough that it's not a huge deal at all.
Right.
But shifting from that to if I'm going to assume the context of God, guru, and self are all the same. So not even God as lover, but just seeing yourself as your own lover, and just, the whole idea of not talking to yourself harsher than you would somebody else, treating yourself with gentle kindness. Reparenting has been a fun exploration, I feel, or just allowing that state of innocence its own space to play.
Totally. Yeah. The self as judge and the self-punishment stuff. I've definitely put in my 10,000 hours. I would consider myself masterful.
Yeah.
Masterful at self-flagellation. And it's so interesting, how the punishment stuff and the shame punishment, carries over when we begin to explore these traditions and practices. And how you were talking about, austere practices. And we can actually feel oh man, I gotta meditate an hour a day, and I gotta do 108 chalisas every week, because we so want to like punish ourselves.
All these methods can turn into that. Just
totally. And like, if your understanding of like karma and is still that merit demerit punishment system, yeah, you're just trading an iron cage for a steel one. And so really being aware of that root, and regardless of the clothes that it puts on, regardless of the language that it wears, being aware of this really root pattern of judgment and love, and how those two feel differently. They really do feel differently in our body when we're judging ourselves. It gets really tight, right? And like maybe the shoulders creep up towards the ears. And Stephen Levine would say, mercy lives in a soft belly. It's like the felt experience is different, and it's very palpable, and it's a great temperature check too. Because we could talk about love and judgment all day, and we could also just stay in our heads all day. So to bring it into the body and into experience is such an important shift.
It's such an important shift, and I've found, for me, especially right now, and just kind of ever since, just even being able to point a finger at being trans has been the biggest journey of not judging my body for what it is, just learning inch by inch, follicle by follicle, to love it, giving it space to just be itself. And also knowing that, at a certain point, there was a time where I felt like major changes to my body needed to be made to be able to feel more comfortable in it. And trusting that regardless of whatever other judgments, whether mostly internal, but also could be external, to follow through on that instinct, to know that this is what is going to give my body the space that it needs to just be able to breathe. It's been a very it's a hard journey. I'll say, like, in my experience, I didn't really realize I was trans until right before sophomore year of college. And pretty much once I was able to label it and kind of more and more be able to disidentify with what was going on and be able to, like, give it an explanation, being able to be like, oh, this is why in my head I've secretly been wishing for breast cancer for however many years, because it just doesn't feel like me. And now being in a place where I've made a lot of the changes to my body to where I do feel more comfortable, and still every day, like, more and more learning how to listen to my body, how to be in my body, letting my body know it can trust me. Yeah, it's a lifelong journey.
Wow. Yeah. What I hear is like the supreme amount of courage that is required for this love to happen. It's
funny you say that, if I can, before you hop into that, because that's not the first time I've gotten my family, I love them to death, and I am so, so lucky that they are all supportive and loving of me throughout this entire process. And I have gotten the comment of like, oh, you're so brave. And I've talked to, who was it? I don't even remember who, somebody else who was trans or queer. And it doesn't even feel like that at the time. Like, I did what I needed to do without much thought, just because I was like, this is my only path to actually like being able to live. But that doesn't mean it's not courageous.
Yeah. Almost like so you're saying almost like a desperation, almost like a longing that motivated that movement towards love.
Yeah. Like, this whole process has just been the process of turning my body from a house into a home.
Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
And not even like turning into, but just sometimes turning into, but mostly just finding what feels comfortable. Because it's a weird paradox, right? Because it's on one hand, it's like needing a lot of these like changes to happen, but being able to like amidst that, it's interesting. Like I can't quite speak to it because I very much fell into the spiritual thing after a large part of my transition had already started or was in progress, because I don't know if I'll ever say my transition is over. I mean, I'm going to have to, unless they come up with something, I'm going to have to give myself testosterone injections every 5 days for the rest of my life at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think I would have even been able to open myself up to anything in the spiritual realm without going through this process of like vastly changing the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Creating the conditions so that without even knowing, I could open up to it, because I wasn't raised super religiously, so I wasn't necessarily like super pro or against. I was like in my head like against, because I've seen all of the harm that it's brought to specifically the queer community. But I went to church like for my communion, and then not again for another like 4 or 5 years until my sister's communion.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And that being a precursor to your path. I was talking about how my path was like kind of started in this dissolution of who I thought I was, and then a reintegration into maybe a more wholesome identity or non-identity that kind of holds a broader experience than who I thought I was. And you speaking of a similar process of transformation occurring on the physical level too, in order to land in that home and love, same, same. Yeah, so interesting. I feel like I want to interview you for a podcast sometime, because I think we have a few episodes to unpack.
Oh yeah, I came up with some ideas this morning of what to talk about, and we've got to one of them.
Nice. Cheers. Cheers. Yeah. Yeah. I have a lot of questions for you now. How does like non-dual play into your understanding of self-love and identification? Yeah. Why don't we just start there? Even in our conversation earlier, we were talking very much dualistically, judgment versus love, right? And we were talking either or kind of thing. But being able to cultivate the spaciousness and flexibility to hold spectrums, to hold non-dualistic space in our understanding can be really freeing. So how does that impact your experience?
It's interesting you ask that because, I mean, as the universe would have it, like that is where a lot of my reading is being done right now. In the book that I mentioned earlier, it's essentially right now I'm only at the portion where they're talking about what duality is to then be able to transcend it. It's very interesting because, and I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I've seen a lot of my transition similar to how the Chalisa starts, the wiping away of the dust with the guru's lotus feet. A kind of not even necessarily building something new, but breaking through what's kind of been built on top of it. So to kind of maybe start to even, because that's a huge question, right? Like we could go for another hour just about that.
At least.
You know, once you start to even question your gender, or yeah, I mean, I'll just stick with your gender because that is such like a big part of our identities that we're given growing up. You kind of start to see how frailly everything is built. So I'd say how that's influenced my understanding of non-duality is that, you know, all of the labels that I've chosen for myself are like labels in spite of labels. So like if I say I'm queer, if I say I'm non-binary, like that's giving you a lot of information without really giving you any specific information, because there's a lot of ways to be either one of those things. So knowing that, or just understanding that, although there's forms that may fit comfortable, or some forms that may fit more comfortably than others, that those are methods to get to that place behind it all that doesn't change, that is just all encompassing. Like, I don't necessarily look at, like, if there's a cis guy and a cis woman like standing in front of me, I wouldn't necessarily like see them as, I mean, like at this point I'm kind of working through like putting the label of like cis or not cis on people, because there is a lot of, in the queer community, a lot of, you know, like we keep us safe, which is totally understandable, but that doesn't mean it is the only place you can be safe. I wouldn't necessarily look at those two people and immediately start like listing their differences in maybe the same way I would before, or even like not even their differences, but just like my different reaction to both of them because they're presenting as they are. And more understanding that like it's my perception of them that's shaping whatever's going on inside of me. They're just like doing them.
Yeah. Yeah, that mirror.
It's all just the divine plan unfolding. Damn, okay. We could go into freedom, we could go into intention, community, truth, trust. What is that? Did I write downtown? What the hell?
Downtown. Yeah, all of them. Freedom, intention, community, trust. Very wrapped up. all very wrapped up in my experience. Start with trust, because I think that's trust and intention. Because I think temporally, that's kind of where it started for me. Because I knew in my heart that I wanted community and freedom before there was any reflection of that in my life.
Intention's been a hard one for me, but yeah, keep going.
Sure. Yeah, I find intention's an interesting one, because for me, it's like such a conceptual thing. What's easier is just desire and attraction. Because we don't really decide that. And I didn't decide that I was attracted to community. And I didn't decide that I desired community. And I think trust starts to arise when those desires are aligned. And so for me, that was, the process of discovering the things that I thought were real to be real. Whether that's Dharma or satsang. Discovering that those things are real, I began to trust my desires. I didn't know why I wanted to quit my job in Nashville. But Guru Purnima 2018, I said, Raghu, I'm going to quit my job. And he said, well, what are you going to do? And I didn't know, either go to New York or go to Pittsburgh. And he looks at me and he said, don't be stupid. You should go and stay with Ram Dass. Jeez. That's an option?
Don't be stupid.
Looks me in the eyes. Don't be stupid. You should go and stay with Ram Dass. It's like, okay, cool. But I didn't know that was an option. I just knew that I wanted to leave that job that I was at. And I did, and it turned out to be that desire turned out to be a true thing. I feel like Maharaji works on a need to know basis. We know as much as we need to know to take that next step. And in my experience, that as much as we need to know manifests as our heart's desire. Another instance that I like to paint is right after RD left his body. We finished the memorial, and I get back to the house, and at this point, it's just me, Dossie, and Steve are here at the house. And it's such like a weird time. Nobody knew what was going on, what we were doing. Pandemic was like just about to start. And I didn't know what I was doing with my life, because all my desires had been fulfilled. I got to like serve the teacher that I loved, and I'm now 27 and I don't know what to do because every desire had been fulfilled. And I remember just getting hit with this random wave of inspiration for construction, right? Bizarre. And going down the old YouTube algorithm rabbit hole. And just, diving into construction and like concrete and like, I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that I was like being attracted to this stuff. And I'm like, oh yeah. And I remembered my buddy Carl telling me about this stuff called aircrete when we were hanging out in India, and how he wanted to build some aircrete houses in India. And so I look up the aircrete thing, and I go to this one place's website where they do workshops. And I saw that they were having a workshop, and it was next month, and it was on Maui, and it was here in Haiku in my neighborhood, and there was one spot left. I'm like, okay.
Literally your name on it.
Yeah, well, sold. And I didn't know I was doing it in my mind. I was thinking, well, yeah, maybe I'll like build myself a cabin in Pennsylvania, at some point. And so I do this workshop and learn how to build with this material, all from this, like, just this attraction that I had no reason for. I made up reasons. And then a year and a half later, it comes time we're finally ready to build a Hanuman temple here on Maui. And do I have just the skill for that? How about it? And we built a mandir out of aircrete. And so another instance of that need to know basis, where my relationship with the Guru, doesn't come in words and directives, but it comes through my own heart. It's whispers and excitement and trust. I think trust comes from experience of that. There can be faith beforehand, but even as I was saying in the beginning of our talk, discovering Buddhism and then having that understanding rooted in experience, I think trust comes in time, and it's not something that we can force. Can't force ourselves to trust something, but trust is a natural occurrence when it's rooted in experience. And then there's the practice of remembering that. And remembering that it's okay to trust because, I have been all right. And so I guess that's more my relationship to intention. I think I trust. I don't know who puts those desires in my heart, but I trust that it's, if we're spacious enough to discern from maybe the things that are put there by our culture, or the things that are really true and aligned in the center of our being, that's the step to take. And I'm still experimenting with that framework. Like I had a desire to apply to grad school, and I did that, and I'm going to grad school next year. And need to know basis. I know enough to take the next step and trust that that's going to be in the highest service I can offer. That's what I'm playing with.
I heard, by the way, congrats, Mr. Harvard.
Thank you. Yeah, Harvard Divinity School. Gonna be fun.
I do want to question you about your decision to go back to grad school, but that is a much more, I think, practical conversation that is not for right now. I'll just say there was like a 2-week time where I was very seriously considering applying to Emory for their divinity program.
Amazing.
But we collectively came to the conclusion that now was the time to go out in the world, not go back into a establishment quite yet. Yeah. That was my trajectory, at least. And I had been accepted to divinity school in the past. I was going to go to Naropa back in 2019, I think it was. I had applied in 2018, but I was still with RD and decided to stay with him. And the best reason I can give you is that because I found that desire in my heart, and because it feels true. And that's as much as I know right now is the most honest answer. And I could give you all kinds of reasons, like the reasons I would give to my parents why I'm going back to school. But the truest reason for me is that desire is there. It feels true. And I trust that. And I trust that whatever comes from that will be where I need to be. That prayer of, put me where I need to be and give me the wisdom to know it. It's kind of trust in action, right? Yeah. And desires are painted as this. I feel like my first few steps into, I don't even know what to call it. Like the spiritual side of things, I don't even know. But I feel like initially kind of painted desires as this very negative thing to have, even though it's totally natural.
Totally.
And like you're talking about, like I've talked about with Sitaram, like where else could they come from? I mean, they're not coming from us. Like we can quantify them. Lance Kramer, a producer for a film, I was talking to him during my grad school mental exploration. And he was like, you don't need any reasons to do anything. Like you're technically an adult now. Like as long as you have the resources, like you can just do whatever, which is mind blowing to really start to understand and get a taste of that freedom.
It's funny that desires is a bad thing paradigm, which like I very much took on as a Buddhist, young Buddhist, right? Self-identified Buddhist, where I had this like immature understanding of like desire is the root of suffering, right? The existence of suffering. Suffering has its causes, and the immature understanding was like desires those causes, and the Buddha also said desire creates your world, and that I feel is very true. And like I like to ask myself, like, do the trees desire the sun? When they are reaching up, like, are they reaching and growing towards that light? Like, is that desire? Feels like it to me. Yeah. And so allowing ourselves to have desires and trust them. Has been an important and healthy shift in my life.
Amen. A freaking amen. Are there any I want to open up the space for any final thoughts, but also if you would like to specifically promote anything or just lead people's attention toward anything.
Yeah, I'll plug some stuff. Thank you. Where I'm sitting right now, Ram Dass's house, which we now call Hanuman Maui, the Ram Dass Loving Awareness Sanctuary, because that's what we're aiming to do here, is to hold a space for that which is sacred, and that thing being loving awareness. Is this house, this land, this property is where Ram Dass accessed and named that space in himself, in all of us, loving awareness, loving awareness. So we're here holding that space, and you can find out more about us at hanumanmaui.org. And right now we're developing. Our intention is to develop a program where people can come here for a month and plug in and experience satsang and experience sadhana and also experience seva. There's the whole thing about, when the guru dies, his ashram becomes the body. I'm not calling our dear guru, and I'm not calling this an ashram, but I am. And I had the unique privilege of serving him in the body. But why we're here is so that others can also have the opportunity to serve that bigger body, which is this house and the property, and just as a method. And so hopefully you'll be one of those people soon. And if anybody's interested, you can stay tuned on our website. It's not official, we're experimenting with it right now, going to see if we can make it work. But that's the hope. So I hope anybody who has that sincere desire will keep an eye on the website, reach out to us, stay in touch, because that's something that we do hope to offer in the coming years. So that's Hanuman Maui. We'll also talk about Kripa Kripa, which is the kirtan group that the boys that I love to sing with, Sitar, Ramdas, and KP and Hari. And we'll offer music every once in a while, and you can find our music at kripa.guru, and Sacred Community Project that is this beautiful budding hub for many great things, and most importantly, community.
And most importantly, this podcast, actually. No.
Yeah, that's why that is why we are talking right now. So, sacredcommunityproject.org. .org. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on the chat. And I hope we can do it like a lot more, because I have a lot of questions for you and a lot more stuff that we can dive into.
Yes, please. I would absolutely love that. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me on this verbal journey together that hopefully, I know for me, hit my heart and opened it just ever so smidgen more.
Yum. That's all we need right there.
Mm-mm-mm. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't feel free. Please be encouraged to check out the Sacred Community Project at sacredcommunityproject.org, where you can find this podcast along with other offerings. But yeah, make sure to leave a review, put some stars, do a follow thing at Baby Teeth Pod, at Sacred Community Project. I don't know, the internet works how it does. From all that ever was, for all that will be, we show thanks to those before us and share grace for those ahead. Here we exist through this moment, grounded by Earth, Mother Divine. May we each recognize our own wings, woven out of love. Ram Ram.